Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Royal Blue podcast. It's Thursday morning, we are live, and I am Ian Croll. Joining me on today's Royal Blue show, we have Reach PLC's Business of Football writer, Dave Powell, who is here to talk all things Everton Takeover. Dave, what's going on? How are you?
Really good. Yeah, disappointed with what happened nearly a week ago now, with the collapse of the Friedkin deal. It's crazy to see that we're almost a week on from that now. Everyone's attention turns to what happens next. It kind of felt we were getting to a point where there was a little bit of blue sky ahead, and the tour was happening in Everton. There's in Ireland, and there was loads of good feeling around it. And now it's kind of back to talking about who acquires a football club and debt and everything like that. And it's it's like Groundhog Day, except it's not funny.
No, yeah, I mean, you're right, because I was producing and uploading the videos that Joe Thomas was sending over from the trip to Ireland, and he just kept going on about the air of positivity around the place, the hotel, the coaching staff, everything, and then that just kick in the teeth, that announcement on Friday, obviously, which we're going to go into a little bit of detail here. As mentioned, we are live, so please, get involved in the stream, get your questions in for Dave, and I will read them out. It's important that you do get your questions in, because I've got a whole list of questions myself, but I may have missed something off that, you guys watching might find rather important. So today's agenda, obviously, it is all about the Everton takeover. The finer details from the news, which broke last week, have been released, but we've brought in Dave today, who will be able to provide greater insight. Before we do get going, please remember to like the video, and obviously, as always, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. And finally, if you'd like to subscribe to Dave's Substack newsletter, you can do so by finding the link in the description. Dave's newsletter, it's called The Bottom Line. It brings you what goes on behind the scenes of the game, and it brings you exclusive reporting on all the issues affecting football. Dave, do you want to give a little plug to your newsletter? Which, again, as mentioned, the link is in the description for anyone who's interested.
Yeah, it's basically covering everything that happens away from the pitch. So, well, money has become such an important part of football, and it has a knock-on effect to everything else that happens, to transfers, to how much we pay for tickets, etc. So, it delves into the issues around it and how where we might be heading with it all. And we have exclusive interviews, insight from industry experts. So it's a fairly broad church, but there's no transfer rumour mill or anything like that form as part of it. But it's supposed to be kind of an explainer really as to where we're going and why we're going there. So.
Okay, yeah, definitely worth a subscription if you fancy it. And as mentioned, the link is in the description for today's podcast. Okay, Dave, well, let's get down to it. The Everton takeover, as mentioned, the finer details, I suppose, have gradually come out over the course of this week. The Everton takeover from the Friedkin Group has, failed, stalled, whatever you want to call it. This deal is obviously a lot more complex than we originally thought. Why has the Friedkin bid failed?
Well, a call on Friday morning from representatives of the Friedkin Group, just to explain that it was the deal had collapsed, and it was the line then was what the kind of line remains. It's the issue is that the £200 million worth of loans at 777 Partners provided to the club through various tranches over the past 9 months or so. So it was happening in 25 million instalments to help with working capital costs. Now that allowed for Moshiri to continue the funding of the stadium with someone else's money over that period of time, and he thought, he said publicly several times that 777 Partners were going to be that would be good custodians of the club. They would be the new owners. Ultimately, that didn't happen for that. Has been a house of cards. It's unravelled in the past 3 months, and we've talked about that previously. Basically, the Friedkin Group. Dan Friedkin is a well-known US entrepreneur, billionaire. He has experience in running football clubs, owns Roma. Everton was seen as a distressed asset, but one which has such a high standing in English football and world football, a new stadium on the horizon very soon, and lots of potential, big fan base, big interest. That was seen as it's investable football club, and that was what was said when I spoke to people on Friday connected with the Friedkin Group was this is an investable football club. That's not the issue. The issue is this £200 million worth of loans from 777 Partners, or ACAP really, which was the funders who 777 Partners were borrowing money off to fund all their acquisitions. Now, we've come to a stage whereby 777 Partners are, that they are, it's almost burning to the ground the empire that they'd built, and the exposure that ACAP had to 777 means that they're trying to sell their assets and reduce exposure in other areas that they have with them. So, they've already instructed banks to sell football clubs, but the loan that they provided to Everton, or the funding they provided to 777 to provide to Everton, is the cause of some concern for the Friedkin Group, largely because there was a civil case, so not a criminal case, civil case brought against 777 and ACAP in a New York court in May, where there were allegations made of fraudulent activity in order to secure $600 million worth of funding. Now, it's important to say that both ACAP and 777 reject those claims. It's still ongoing litigation, but it's worrisome for someone like the Friedkin Group, because allegations of fraud are something to be taken extremely seriously, and they can have ramifications further on down the line. So basically, it's Leadenhall Capital Partners, I think, was the firm which has taken this civil action against 777 and ACAP, and they claim that they'd kind of double pledged on some of the assets that they owned to get as collateral for loans, which you're not allowed to do, and then they'd also put up other assets which they didn't own as collateral for loans. So that that's their claim for fraudulent activity there. What that means is that there is a risk, could be further on down the line, if this does go to a criminal court by the DOJ, Department of Justice in the US, that could mean that there would be a potential for a Proceeds of Crime Act further on down the line, and that is something which it would be a thread that would run to the Friedkin Group if they acquired the club and then paid off the loan, etc. So
even
that's
if
what's
they paid
concerning
off
them.
the loan,
yeah. So
just
it's
outright.
yeah, because I mean the club would have benefited from the Proceeds of Crime Act. Now there was some talk about indemnity insurance that the Friedkin Group were looking at to try and protect themselves from that, but that would require some element of Moshiri give on that respect, which I don't think he was minded to do. And it's also very, very hard to get insurance against a kind of open-ended Proceeds of Crime Act further on down the line. So I think that it was just deemed as too much risk. They don't want to be tied up. They don't want to be linked. They don't want to have any exposure to 777 debt or ACAP debt. And also, it's extremely expensive because the interest rate is very, very high on the loans that 777 and I'm going to say 777 now because I'm sick of saying 777 Partners. It's a very, very high interest bearing loan on what they provided to Everton. If you looked at someone like MSP or even the Friedkin Group, who paid off the MSP loan when they first came on board through these talks, that was £158 million. That's kind of an interest rate of 5% or so. You're looking well into double digits for the interest rate of the 777 ACAP loan, and it's a lot to pay off. And I don't think there is the desire for the Friedkins to get involved in something which has open-ended litigation.
Who would then, if it was to go to Proceeds of Crime Act, is there a barrier or a sense of, because that's in the US or this is the UK, are the laws different, or do you know what I mean? Would that still impact Everton as well?
Yeah, I mean it's because the Friedkins are a US based company.
Yeah,
that's where all their business interests are. and for them to be, it is the fact that they are already being asked to pay a sum for the football club, take on a large amount of debt, but then it's this. There's good debt and bad debt. You look at Spurs, £800 million worth of debt, but it's good debt, interest rates fairly low, stable, and it's for an infrastructure project. This is money where they don't know the source of the money, and if it's been acquired fraudulently, if that is proven to be the case, which I stress again they deny, that is problematic for the Friedkin Group, because then you are a link through that. So it could be impactful further on down the line, and I don't think there's you're looking what they don't think the risk and the reward is there for them to pay off this loan and at a very, very high interest rate for an open-ended litigation ongoing. I don't think the appetite's there for them to do that, as well as have to clean up and everything else that comes with the football club. It becomes a very, very expensive process, and one which offers some element of reputational risk, because they're they would be linked with the debt which has been accrued by 777 and ACAP.
If it got to that stage, then who would bring the prosecution to? I don't know, ACAP, 777.
Well, at the moment it's only a civil case. So
yeah, but if it got to that stage, is it the American?
Yeah, it would be.
system?
So the US DOJ
Attorneys.
would. Yeah, they would have to. They could bring criminal charges against 777 and ACAP for if they deem it to be fraudulent activity, and that is when it would become really problematic. I mean, it's still not been resolved. There was supposed to be a hearing back end of last week around this Leadenhall case. No resolution was reached, and it continues to rumble on. Even if it's settled, I mean, the DOJ could still bring criminal charges, but it's at the moment ACAP are just wanting to try and reduce exposure to 777 debt. So there'll be, a high interest bearing loan is doing well for ACAP on their own balance sheet at the moment. So they wouldn't be able to, they wouldn't be looking to take a haircut on that, because they need to raise funds as and where they can.
Sorry, go on. We'll come on to that. Yeah. We'll come on to that. But tell me if I'm wrong. So my understanding of the Leadenhall case, which I don't really know anything about, to be honest. I know little bits. It's obviously from what I've read, on reports. It's allegations of double pledging assets.
Yeah.
So is there a suggestion that's what 777 have done with this £200 million loan to Everton in some way?
Well, like 777 have done across their entire investment portfolio, it's been spending other people's money, and that's what investment firms do, really. But their main tap of finance came from ACAP. Now, this isn't the first instance of 777 being involved in something like this. So there was an issue with non-payment of loans that they had from a company called Obra Capital, which they were involved with, which they tried to lend money off. Again, allegations of collateral which they were putting up, which either wasn't theirs to put up, or they'd already had a kind of a mortgage on, I suppose. So that's the issue here. So they've been double pledging on businesses to raise this money, and you can't do that. So they've already got loans which have used security in other businesses, and they're doing that. That's the allegation anyway. So it's a real messy web, and one which it still means that even though the 777 deal collapsed in May, and in reality it collapsed long before that. I think the writing was on the wall for several weeks before that. You only have to look at what's recently happened with. They're selling all their football assets, their investment in the British basketball leagues and the toilet. Nearly all of the British basketball league staff were made redundant recently because of the collapse of all that. So there's real life, consequences to all this, and to their behaviour. So they were never viable purchases for the football club. What they did is they provided Moshiri with the ability to fund the stadium and working capital to keep the lights on, I suppose, during the past 8-9 months without him having to spend his own money. Problem is, now they've kind of got into bed with the devil, I suppose. It's you are linked, and it's going to be it's not going to be any different for the next people that come in and look at the football club. So it will be. It's, as I said, the Friedkin Group representative stressed it was a investable football club. With a new stadium is kind of a real carrot, especially for US investors. New stadium is something that in the US is core to revenue generation, is how to monetize the stadium and the live event. But the problem is going to be this loan. The lawyers of the next potential people that come in and purchase a club will tell them the same thing. This could be problematic further on down the line, and it's up to whether it's the appetite for risk. Now, it's not to say that no one will come in and be willing to pay off the 200 million plus with high interest loan and be willing to take that risk of a poker further on down the line. But the problem is that really genuine, legitimate people will see this as risk. So hence the reason why Dan Friedkin and Friedkin Group have looked at it and thought that's probably more than we're willing to do for us. And then you start to, the risk. You're looking at someone who's willing to a willing risk taker who may be willing to take that on board. But again, it's the pool becomes shallower and shallower when you factor this in, and it's sad really, because it's the club are now bound to this investment company, which has been proven to be unfit to manage sporting assets, but they're still bound to it. And it's probably Moshiri's made plenty of mistakes at Everton, and this one's probably his biggest.
Well, I want to continue on with the Leadenhall case, because obviously that seems to be one of the main issues with regards to the Everton takeover. Is there any suggestion, or is there any, from your part, that Friedkin has pulled out as a negotiation tactic to try and drive price down, to try and negotiate with the loan? I mean, I've read even that ACAP can't even negotiate with regards to any loan, the stuff that they've loaned out because of this civil case that they're involved in. So I'm only asking this because obviously you see in the past Friedkin has bought Roma, but he did pull out of that deal. Weeks later, completed the deal. Obviously, he was trying to get a better deal for himself and his company. So is there a negotiation tactic, or what are we saying about that?
Well, obviously, what happened with Roma it's easy to think that maybe something similar is in play here. But it has to be stressed, even when Friedkin Group came onto the scene first, it was stressed quite strongly that this was early stage things, and there was no guarantee of a deal being done. And when they came onto the scene, it was stressed that it was going to be this 777 loan, which could be problematic for them. So they've done the due diligence on the football club as kind of a going concern, and its assets and its revenue generation potential, etc. But in reality, I think it is the reason for it ending is legitimate. That it's just something they don't want to get involved with. I don't think personally it's a negotiation tactic. I think it's them thinking this is something which is insurmountable for them as a business. Now they're still linked to Everton because they provided they paid off the MSP loan, 158 million. I think they've loaned a further maybe 40 odd million, take up to about 200 million, which helps with working capital to complete the stadium. Now the stadium's got another 50-60 million left to completion, which they will find. So there's no question that stadium build is not going to get done. They'll find that, but it's just it's denied what the Moshiri decision to fund the club the way he has in the past 9 months with someone else's money who's less than squeaky clean, to say the least. is something which is going to now set Everton back at a key point, because as we said at the top, positivity was there around this. Felt like they're just about to turn a corner, about to free themselves from the shackles of what's gone on in the past 5 or 6 years, and be able to start to plot the course for something a little brighter. But now issues of kind of civil litigation in New York courts is proving damaging for Everton's own progress because of another poor Moshiri decision, and it's not going to go away anytime soon, and it's quite bleak, and it's going to take. I do feel really, really sorry for not only the fans, but for it's another season of Sean Dyche and the players probably having to go to the well to make do amend again, and it's just another season of being kind of knocked around the head with a big frying pan every single week, and with no end in sight to the seemingly endless bad news. But something will happen, positive eventually. It just will, but it's going to have to take someone willing to hold their fingers over their nose and take a jump in at the deep end and take a little bit of risk, and probably lose a fair bit of money early on in order to make it happen. Hopefully that person arrives in a timely manner, but it's key that it's the right person. We can't just jump from a Moshiri to a 777 to someone of the same ilk. It has to be someone with the right skill set to be able to turn Everton around, because they are an investable club.
Back to the lead in all case then, because obviously there seems to be the overriding issue surrounding the takeover. You mentioned there should have been a hearing last week. Did that take place, or did it not take place? Did you say? Sorry.
There was no resolution which arrived from it. Okay. So it's kind of the needle hasn't moved at all. It's as it was. It's still ongoing. And
so there's no timeline to say when this could be finished.
No,
how long do these civil cases usually last?
The wheels of American justice tend to turn fairly slowly, so I wouldn't expect a swift resolution to it. Certainly not in a timely fashion enough for Dan Friedkin to come back in. If it gets resolved and further on down the line, maybe the club managed to find enough working capital to get themselves through another campaign, which they will, because they've got assets to sell. The PSR compliant, they will just about be, I imagine. Maybe next summer is something which is realistic, or maybe maybe middle of the year, but or towards the start of 2025. But it goes slowly in American justice, so you are effectively, you can't wait for that to happen for someone to come back in. And Moshiri wants to exit as soon as he can. So, I wouldn't be waiting on that, finding a resolution to speed things up. And even if it does, the DOJ could still come in and kind of present criminal charges if they so wish. So, it won't be cut and dried anytime soon, which means that probably means that Friedkin won't be coming back in anytime soon.
What's the best resolution for Everton then with regards to that case? Whether ACAP are found not guilty as such, it's not a criminal case, but they're let off scot-free, or they have to pay. What's the best resolution for Everton?
It's for them to be deemed to have not engaged in fraudulent activity, and for the DOJ to agree on that front and not proceed with any criminal charges. Then that removes the element of risk of having these proceeds of crime acts further on down the line and being extrinsically linked to these firms and having exposure to them. So, and that takes away that element of it. It would still be an expensive loan to clear, but having the removal of that risk would be, I think, if that would have transpired in recent weeks, then the Friedkin deal would have been a goer. But here we are.
Okay, well, what happens if it's the other scenario where ACAP are, found to be being naughty boys, and does that affect Everton? Does that impact that? Does it impact Moshiri individually?
I'm not a legal expert on that, so it's difficult for me to say the kind of the minutiae of detail what happened. But it opens up potential issues for Moshiri. It's just in terms of selling the club, and no one wants.
Could he face criminal proceedings though as well himself?
I mean, I don't think so. But again, I'm not a legal expert on that, so it's hard for me to make comment. But it becomes incredibly difficult for him to sell a football club where there could be a poker in place.
In terms of the positive news, I suppose, a lot of reports saying, you've already touched upon it about the stadium, but Everton's short-term financial position is stable. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. They've got so they already had no cash flow issues because of we've got end of the Premier League season arrived, which means you have the tranche of Premier League money which arrives from central funding. So that was welcome, and then obviously they've engaged in player trading, which has aided that. I mean, obviously you likes of Dobbin, Onana recently, they've been able to raise funds to help with cash flow. So there's no problem in that respect, and they'll be able to add some players this summer.
Yeah.
And the squad should be in, you imagine, better shape than it was the start of last season. So there isn't an issue on that front, but it's just everything feels like kicking the can down the road, and there will become another point whereby cash flow will be an issue, and finding the next tranche of working capital to complete the stadium fit out or to meet payroll obligations will be required. And then where does that money come from? And that's the problem that Everton found themselves in September time last year when they were looking to sell, and Moshiri engaged in this rather bonkers pursuit of 777 as the new owners, and allowing them to fund the club to such an extent whereby we're still paying the price for it now. But in the short to medium term, club is fine financially, but it's the long term which still needs to be addressed, and it won't be addressed for as long as kind of Moshiri remains in situ and we don't have a resolution for a new buyer.
I mean, it seems futile to even discuss potential new bidders, because it doesn't really matter who it is at this moment in time, because as we've already stated, they're going to face the same issues that Friedkin faced, obviously, when he did his due diligence. So other potential suitors then, we know there was a whole host, before the agreement was made with Moshiri and Friedkin. Yeah. Is there anyone who you're hearing is a front runner right now? I mean, I know it's been less than a week since the deal fell through. I know these deals and proposals take a long time to put together, but is there anyone, you see top two, top three, just one standout who could take over?
I think the similar names will appear over the coming days and weeks. I imagine that the issue that the Friedkins face will mean that we are probably going to see that any US bidders that have kind of US investors, which they have responsibilities towards, may shy away from
US
from such a bid. I mean, John Textor was quite vocal about his interest in Everton as an asset a couple of months back, but obviously he still has shares in Crystal Palace which he has to alight himself of. But he also has a group which has other US investors. So I think anyone with responsibility to investors may be put off in the short term. Some may not. Some may accept the risk. But I think it takes a couple off the table. And you may. I mean, the Vac Manukian bid, maybe that comes back. I mean, there was an offer of 400 million, I think it was, initially. Moshiri went with the Friedkin Group, but that 400 million is less than the sum of the debts at Everton. So it depends who's willing to front this up. I think the Manukian bid had a element of Middle Eastern royalty involved. Probably less concerned about risks to investors there. So there's no standout candidates. I think we're probably going to see someone like, and those who made a bid previously would probably be willing to do the same again, but they're going to get told the same by their own legal team. It's up to them whether they choose to overlook that advice and still think it's worth the risk. Some will be willing to do that, but I think now, given the Friedkins have looked at this and decided it's a no for them on this basis, I think that probably makes the pool slightly shallower in terms of viable options.
Realistic ones.
Yeah, realistic and legitimate ones as well. I mean, Everton need legitimate, strong owners moving forward. They can't just be, it can't be a kind of a Moshiri Mark II or anything like that. I mean, he obviously had his good, it came in good faith and spent so much money, but it's all, it needs strong leadership, and in order to turn around what's been created, really. But at the moment, the names I'm seeing are the similar ones, which kicked around last time. I'm not too sure any of them really move the needle in a really positive way that gives you enormous hope for the future. But these things move really quickly. I mean, Dan Friedkin was barely a footnote when we started talking about potential takeovers. I mean, I think everyone was talking quite in depth about everyone else being interested, and Friedkin was just mentioned as potentially interested. But then he kind of came to the fore. Maybe something like that happens. Everton need a little bit of manna from heaven at the moment, so hopefully that arrives in due course.
Okay, just a little time out just to say hello to everyone who's watching on the stream. We've got just under 170 people watching, so there's quite a few questions coming in, and I'm going to read as many out as possible at the end for Dave to try and answer. So if you are watching and you've got a question, if you've got an opinion, if you've got a point, get it in, get your question down on the stream. I mean, Dave, let's face it, Moshiri is the main man in all of this. Without, this is obviously speculation because I know you're not Moshiri's bank manager, but how is it perceived, Moshiri's financial position right now? Is he? The reason I ask is because I think it was January 2023 where he did an interview, like an official interview with the club. I think it went out, through the Everton Fan Advisory Board, where he was talking about trying to find additional investments for the club, for the stadium, I think, which ended up resulting to be 777. Ended up, I'm not sure if MSP had already.
It was MSP first, and then he kind of kicked open the door to 777.
The reason I bring this up is because I think he also stated during this interview that he could fund things himself. He was just looking for additional partners. So for me, it just feels like he's backed himself, Moshiri, into that much of a corner that you've stated multiple times that he's not going to get any money back, if anything, on his investment. But he may now have to spend more of his own money just to get out of the club, just to pay off this loan. But then, as you've already stated, if he does pay off this loan, then is he going to be, involved in any criminal proceedings in the future? It's just a big mess.
It's a huge mess. Now he remains a wealthy man, but it's important to state that a lot of his wealth remains tied up in Russian-linked business, which some are still under sanctions. So he has a shareholding in the USM or Metallo Invest. Now I'm not too sure how close him and Alisher Uzmanov are anymore, but Moshiri remains his shareholder. Now he can't get that out and put that to work at Everton. And if you're selling a house, you're not going to put a new kitchen in. For the new owner, you're not going to spend more money.
But if you can't sell the house, you might, people making, as an analogy, people make improvements to the house to try and sell it. It's kind of the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, they've. He's not going to spend any more of his own money. I just don't think that's a thing which he's going to do anymore, because it's money he won't see again. Because in reality, he's probably going to have to. Any real potential buyer is going to come in and should be saying, you should be taking £1 for this football club because we're taking on the debt and the requirement to complete the stadium, and he's not going to make anything back here. So, but he's not. If that's the case, he's certainly not going to be willing to fund more for a club which he knows he's trying to remove or rid himself of. That is he's already entangled in this deeply. There's a reason why he went to 777 to fund the working capital for in tranches of 10, 15, 20 million over the past 9 months or so. It's because he didn't want to fund it himself, and he found a willing patsy, I suppose, to do it for him. He thought they would be the eventual purchase of the football club, which, and it still blows my mind to think they very nearly were it not for the unravelling of some businesses just prior. The Premier League were minded to give them approval to take over the football club. Now, that was on the conditions that they paid off the MSP loan and met a few other conditions, money in an escrow account, things like that. If they would have still had this relationship with ACAP and there wasn't this ongoing litigation with the Leadenhall case in the US, and ACAP weren't reducing their exposure and turning off the funding tap, they would have got that and they would have had the football club. And Moshiri's plan would have worked. He wouldn't have had to put any more money into it. He would have got back something and it would no longer be his problem. None of this is anything he's kind of foreseen. This is all. None of this is part of the plan. This is he's operating on the fly a bit now, and I think he will be minded to find another stopgap until such time that this kind of Leadenhall case might be resolved. But ultimately, I just don't see an outcome where he puts more of his own money in.
Is there an outcome where he would need to put more money in because he might lose more money?
Yeah, I mean, if it comes to the stage of the club is facing administration, or they are, it's going to be something which has ramifications for his ability to sell on the price point of the football club.
Yeah.
Then I think he might be backed into a corner. But it's how much readily available finance he has to hand to be able to do that. I mean, because I don't know how much of his wealth is tied up in Russia, but I imagine a fair portion of it is, or Russian-linked businesses. So that's the issue.
Will those, speculating, but would those businesses be ones that have been sanctioned?
Yes, yeah. So he has a shareholding. I did have a shareholding, not a majority shareholding. I think it was 5 or 10% in Metallo Invest or USM. My understanding is he still holds that, but yeah, he's not going to be able to get his money out from some things like that. But also, he's not going to be minded to spend his own money for something if he thinks he can. If there's a better way of kicking the can down the road, finding a willing investment partner. But it's hard to think who's going to be willing to come on board to provide loans to Everton at the moment with the current situation. Unless it's at a very, very high interest rate, and I imagine that that's he's stuck between a rock and a hard place at the moment, and I just don't see, for the time being, anyway, a period where he starts to fund the club again.
Okay, before I come on to questions, then of questions from the stream, what. The final question from me, I suppose. What happens next then? Are we literally just having to wait for this civil case in America to take place and finalise?
No, I think there'll be people who will be ready to come in and God knows there's been enough people kicking the tyres at Everton past 3 years. There'll be people willing to take the risk. They will, but it's whether they are the best bet. But I think the Friedkin interest was the first real viable interest that
he seemed like a good fit.
Yeah, and I think Moshiri could have, if that would have come to pass, it would have been him selling it maybe to. He would have seen he's passed the baton over to responsible owners who will do better. Problem is now. It's a bit of an unknown. There may be some really legitimate people out there willing to take the risk, and that's it's not impossible to think that, but I just think that for some it will. The pool is more shallow because of the current issues, which we've talked about. It's all about the appetite for risk.
Would the risk, form part of potentially taking over the club, paying off the ACAP loan, and then just hoping for the best that there's no criminal proceedings?
Yeah, I think so. And then that may be the way it goes. I mean, Moshiri certainly doesn't seem minded to kind of clear that loan himself. I'm not too sure whether he has a wherewithal in terms of cash lying around to do that. But I just think we are probably in maybe a little bit of a holding pattern at the moment as people try and reassess. But now this has become an issue which has come to light after. I mean, this is the third period of due diligence that a would-be purchaser would have gone through with Everton now, and like I said at the start, that the football club itself is not uninvestable. It remains an attractive proposition, but it's the 777 loan which remains the kind of the binding issue really. So I think we may find that now a lot of would-be investors and purchasers will be assessing that particular case, the potential ramifications of it, and whether the risk and reward is there. It may help them in terms of a negotiation tactic for a lower price. I don't know, but I just don't think there'll be anything imminent now. I think people will start assessing what happens with this case before they go in with 2 feet, really.
Okay, so let's do some quick fire questions that have come in on today's live stream. Rob Vanman, do you think Friedkin will come back in? He did at Roma. I mean, we discussed it. Again, this is just always goes back to other potential suitors, but is there a scenario where Friedkin comes back in?
Maybe he does if it gets resolved fairly swiftly and they revisit them from a legal point of view, maybe. But I just get the impression that this is an issue which they're not going to be comfortable with until it's resolved. And as I said, the wheels of justice turn very slowly in America. So that's something which they may have to, it might not be a swift resolution. If before the end of the year we get a resolution, maybe early part of next year, who knows? They've obviously done their due diligence on the football club. They know what to expect. They've got a new stadium on the horizon. It's very investable. But this is the issue with it. But it all depends what happens in between now and then, and whether Moshiri decides to just kind of cut and run for the first offer that he gets now, as opposed to being he had several options recently, more than he's ever had. At Friedkin Group, Manukian, there was interest from a couple of others. Bell and Downing. So there was interest. MSP were on the fringes of it. They decided against that. So he had options, but now I think it's going to be hard. I don't see Friedkin returning imminently anyway, but it's not to say he won't at a later date, but it depends whether someone else gets in there first.
Cool. I feel like some of the questions that are coming in have, Dave's already maybe answered some of them in some shape or form or another, some way or another. But we'll continue on with some of the quick fire ones. So Emma has asked, could the 777 money be kept in an escrow account until legal matters are cleared up? I think that is in reference to maybe Friedkin and the £200 million loan. Is that a viable option? I mean, why would he want to tie his money up, I suppose, in an escrow account? That
Friedkin?
Yeah.
I think it's the potential ramifications of it all is what the issue is. I mean, Friedkin's they have access to huge amounts of capital for all this, but it's the legal issues that surround it and the potential link, because Friedkin has external investors as well, so it's he's a fiscal responsibility to them. So I don't think there's. I imagine that they've assessed all the options that they could have had moving forward, and it all comes down to. I've mentioned risk about 100 times, but that's what it is, and it's the kind of risk averse on this one.
Okay, I think I asked this one earlier on, so a little bit of a recap, but Gavin Cunningham has said, can the new owners pay the loan off as part of the purchase fee, cut all ties with 777? I think you've obviously already stated that, but there could be criminal proceedings further down the line, depending on the leading all case.
Yeah, and that's it. The loan could be paid off. I mean, the Friedkins could have the financial capability to pay that loan off, but it's the issue is, what has been the source of that funding? Has it been funded through fraudulent activity? And it's having that thread which leads from A to B. And I think that is basically where we're at with it. So,
interesting one from Mike Cosgrove with regards to the inner workings of the club. At what point does Moshiri have to accept the sale isn't coming anytime soon, and that he needs to appoint a full-time and fully qualified board?
That's a good point. It does feel like the club has just been in limbo it has been in limbo for so long. I mean, we've got an interim board, an owner that doesn't want to be there and is searching to alight himself of it. And that can only last for so long. I think that moment was going to have to come fairly soon. But he will still be thinking that his exit comes swiftly, even though this is, like we said, this is the third failed attempt to sell the football club in the past 2 years, so that the odds aren't particularly in his favour. But the club can't just continue on an interim basis indefinitely. Yeah. And he will he will know that, but also he's not, I don't think he's probably minded not to make big changes structurally for a club I think emotionally he checked out of quite a while ago.
Yeah, I mean it's a fascinating question. It's one that needs addressing, because there's so many areas of the club that need looking at. There's the board one, but on the pitch, Sean Dyche and Kevin Thelwell's contracts up at the end of this coming season. Depending on how well Sean Dyche does, you would probably say that the club needs to start looking at offering Sean Dyche a new contract within the next 3-4 months, because his stock has probably never been higher, really.
No, absolutely,
or it could never be higher if he continues on.
It's hard to think of too many. I know maybe he's not always the most popular with his brand of football, but it's hard to think of many managers who've done a better job in tough circumstances than Dyche. And again, it's just that everything points to the a kind of lack of the club's just kind of seems to exist at the moment. That's a real shame, because there's so many good people that work there. There's a new stadium on the horizon, but everything is just walk around in this kind of haze of nothing feels permanent or secure at the moment. Everything is, we've got interim board, you've got manager and coaching staff whose contracts are coming up, and then you've still got the spectre, which would be the most cruel thing, for Everton to begin a new a campaign in a new stadium, but not in the Premier League, and Sean Dyche is the man, undoubtedly, to make sure that doesn't happen. I mean, Everton need to be in a new stadium in the Premier League so that he can make most of it as an asset. But it should be the most exciting time in Everton history at the moment. Last season at Goodison Park, something to celebrate. Moving into something which will be a game changer in the long run. This isn't a permanent state of affairs for Everton. There will be kind of brighter times, and there will be a change in ownership. But it's just kind of almost feels a bit of a zombie at the moment, the football club, because there's no. It suffers from a lack of leadership at the very top. I don't mean leadership at board level, because again, good people doing good jobs, but ultimately it is Moshiri's football club, and it's he has he's kind of neglected his responsibility towards it.
Okay, final question from me then. I suppose I've had all the questions, but I'm going to slip in one more. The club seems to be secure for the short term. Long term, obviously a lot of question marks raised. I don't want to just throw the word administration in willy-nilly, but if things do take a turn for the worst, that is an avenue the club potentially might have to go down. But that is something that Moshiri, all of Everton's creditors, obviously don't want. So I think my question is, something is going to have to give at some point. If Moshiri can't find new owners because he doesn't fancy the deal for himself, or because people just, do this due diligence and they keep pulling out, for me, surely he's going to have to start getting back involved with the club, funding the club himself, just to keep things afloat. So the club doesn't go into administration.
And I think we touched on that before, didn't we? I think if push came to shove, he would probably have to, because there's so many. When you've got creditors in there who would have to take a haircut in the instance of administration. I mean, some of them are secured creditors. So the Friedkin Group's loan is a mortgage on the stadium now. So what 777 is, that's unsecured junior debt. That's behind rights and media funding and the TFG loan. So that's unsecured. So, but I think. I don't like saying the word administration because it's
no, of course not.
And I don't think there's no reason to be concerned about that. There's still time for the club to. I mean, the threat of that a couple of months ago was fairly real. It certainly appeared that way, but now the club has working capital and has ability to meet its obligations, but. I think if push came to shove, but I only think it'd be for a short period. Were he to kind of step back in and take a more prominent role. I mean, there was hints to that by the fact he came back on the board, wasn't there? In a more prominent role, but it's still absentee ownership for the most part. And I do think we'll have a resolution within the next 9 months, but it's kind of how beneficial that would be for the football club, I don't know.
Just one final one, which you touched upon just then. Just for anyone who doesn't know, so Friedkin's loan is secured against the stadium. What does that actually mean? Is it secured against Bramley Moor or Goodison Park?
Bramley Moor. So what? So the stadium development company. So it means that they would get
a percentage.
Yeah. So that's largely. I mean, so collateral for lending purposes is one of the reasons why we're talking about 777 still, because they put up collateral for them to borrow money, which either didn't exist, claims of, or ones that they'd already mortgaged. So you can't, that's the reason for it. So so there, there's the Friedkin loan is secured against the stadium, and that replaced the mortgage which MSP had on it for security as well. So it's they're okay, but it's such a web of difficult financial kind of mess that's been created, and at a time when we are how many weeks away from the start of the new season.
Less than a month
from the start of the new season. All the goodwill that was built up has just been punctured, and we're back talking about Farah Moshiri's inability to get the right people into the football club as investors, and another poor Moshiri decision which is going to continue to hold back the football club for the time being.
Okay, well, I think, Dave, that is all for today's show. I hope, for people who are watching, people who listen, that has answered any of the remaining lingering questions with regards to the Everton takeover. I mean, it's obviously still ongoing. Who knows what is going to happen in the next couple of weeks, months. Any final remarks, Dave? All good?
I just hope dearly that it gets resolved. I mean, I was really, really hopeful for the Friedkin bid as well. It genuinely felt like it was a corner turned, and because we've said at the start, the football club doesn't just need new owners; it needs the right owners, and that doesn't mean people that are going to come in and spend lots of money on transfers and immediately think about competitive success and making promises of Champions League football. It's about realising the damage which has been done by the last 3 or 4 years, the pain, recognising the pain which Everton fans have gone through, rebuilding a football club which can operate sustainably, and then utilising the tools that will exist through the new stadium to help the football club grow and become the best version of itself on a sound financial footing. I think that's the overriding thing. I really hope that the next people that come in make that happen. They very well may do, but Moshiri didn't have to make it hard.
Yeah, he was continuing to make it hard, didn't he?
Yes.
Okay, well, we will leave it there. Just a reminder, or if you are joining us late, Dave's got a newsletter which is called The Bottom Line. It brings you what goes on behind the scenes of the game, that is football, and brings you exclusive reporting on all the issues affecting football itself. So if you fancy giving that a subscription, that link to that is in the it's in the description to this show. So yeah, you can go and see that there. Also, give us a like if you've liked this show today, and subscribe to the Royal Blue YouTube channel if you haven't already. This podcast, the audio version, will be out on Spotify and Apple Pods within the next few hours. Also, give us a review. Follow us on Facebook as well, which is Everton FC Liverpool Echo. I've been Ian Croll, and I've been joined by Dave Powell, and this has been the Royal Blue Podcast.